Close your eyes and let me take you somewhere impossible. Somewhere where stone castles pierce winter clouds. Where one person's word can end a life or start a war. Where crowns weigh so heavy they crush the souls beneath them. This isn't a fairy tale. This is medieval Europe. And tonight, you're going to discover what it really meant to be royal. Welcome, weary traveler. Before we begin, I want you to get truly comfortable, sink into your pillow, feel the weight of your blanket. Because over the next while, I'm going to walk you through the hidden corridors of power, into the private chambers where kings removed their crowns and became human again, into the dark corners where royal secrets festered like wounds. My name is your guide through the Sleepy Law Library, and this is the story of medieval royalty as you've never heard it before, not the sanitized version from history books, the real version, the weird version, the deeply human version that will change how you see power forever. The year is 1137. A 15-year-old girl named Eleanor has just inherited one of the richest territories in Europe, Aquitaine, a land of vineyards and castles, of wealth beyond imagination. Every king, every prince, every ambitious lord wants her, not because they love her, because they want what she owns. Within months, she's married to the King of France, Louis VII, a boy king, pious and serious, everything Eleanor is not. She's vivacious, educated, independent. He's devoted to God and prayer. It's a disaster waiting to happen. But that's how royal marriages worked. Love was a luxury. Power was everything. Imagine being 15 and suddenly Queen of France. You wake up in palaces so cold your breath freezes. Servants dress you in layers of heavy fabric that make it hard to breathe. Every move you make is watched, judged, recorded by 100 eyes. You can't sneeze without someone noting it down for history. Eleanor's morning begins before dawn, not by choice. The castle operates on a rigid schedule dictated by prayer times and the sun. Her ladies-in-waiting enter her chamber, silent as ghosts. They've learned that waking a queen too abruptly can mean losing your position. Or worse, the bed she sleeps in is enormous, piled with furs and embroidered blankets. Not for comfort, for survival. Medieval castles are freezing. Stone walls absorb cold like sponges, even with fires burning constantly. The chill seeps into your bones. Royalty might have better beds than peasants, but they're still shivering through winter nights. Her ladies help her dress, layer after layer. First the linen chemise against her skin, then the undergown, then the overgown of silk or velvet, then the surcoat, then the mantle, trimmed with ermine fur that cost more than a peasant family earns in a lifetime. Finally, jewels, necklaces, rings, brooches, each piece a statement of wealth and power. But here's what the history books don't tell you. Getting dressed takes over an hour. Eleanor can't just throw on clothes and go. Every layer must be arranged perfectly. Every jewel positioned precisely, because appearance is everything. A rumpled queen is a weak queen, and weakness in medieval politics is a death sentence. Once dressed, Eleanor proceeds to morning mass. This isn't optional. Kings and queens must demonstrate piety. They rule by divine right, chosen by God to lead. Skip church and you're questioning that divine mandate. So every morning, Eleanor kneels on cold stone floors and prays for hours. The chapel is beautiful. At least, stained glass windows cast colored light across the floor. Gold leaf covers the altar. Incense smoke rises in lazy spirals. But Eleanor's knees ache, her stomach growls, and she's thinking about the 100 problems waiting for her after prayer's end. Because being queen isn't just wearing nice dresses and attending parties. It's work, constant, exhausting work. After Mass, Eleanor must attend council meetings, listen to petitions, settle disputes, make decisions that affect thousands of lives. And she's 15 years old. In the council chamber, old men stare at her with barely concealed contempt. A woman in power, how unnatural, how improper. They smile to her face and plot behind her back. Eleanor learns quickly to trust no one. In the medieval court, everyone wants something. Loyalty is temporary. Betrayal is always one bad decision away. Her husband Louis is little help. He's more interested in prayer than politics. He wants to be a monk, not a king. Eleanor finds herself managing the realm while Louis contemplates God. It's frustrating, it's lonely, and it's about to get worse, because Louis decides to go on crusade, a holy war to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim rule. And Eleanor, audacious and bold, decides to go with him. This shocks everyone. Women don't go on crusade. Crusading is for warriors, for men. But Eleanor isn't interested in what women are supposed to do. So in 1147, Eleanor of Aquitaine sets out for the Holy Land, leading her own contingent of soldiers. She wears armor. She rides a white horse. She commands troops. The men around her don't know whether to be impressed or horrified. Most settle on both. The crusade is a disaster. The journey alone kills thousands. Disease, hunger, ambush. The desert sun is merciless. The enemy is fierce. The Christian armies fail to take Jerusalem. They limp home defeated, demoralized, and decimated. Eleanor's marriage to Louis doesn't survive the journey. Rumors swirl. Eleanor had an affair with her uncle in Antioch. Eleanor was too bold, too independent. Eleanor brought bad luck. Whether any of it's true doesn't matter. In medieval politics, deception is reality. By the time they return to France, the marriage is effectively over. In 1152, after 15 years of marriage, Eleanor and Louis get an annulment. The official reason is consanguinity, being too closely related. The real reason is they can't stand each other. Louis wants a pious, submissive wife. Eleanor wants anything but Louis. At 30 years old, Eleanor is single again and still fabulously wealthy. Within 8 weeks, she marries Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy. He's 18, she's 30. He's energetic, ambitious, tempestuous. She's experienced, wealthy, cunning. Together, they're unstoppable. 2 years later, Henry becomes King Henry II of England. Eleanor is queen again. But this time, she's Queen of England and still Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right. Together, Eleanor and Henry control more of France than the French king does. It's called the Angevin Empire, and it's one of the most powerful realms in medieval Europe. Eleanor bears Henry 8 children over 13 years, 5 sons, 3 daughters. This is her primary duty as queen. Produce heirs. Royal bloodlines must continue. Dynasties must be secured. Eleanor's body becomes a political instrument, bearing future kings and queens. But childbirth in medieval times is terrifying. No modern medicine, no anesthesia, no understanding of infection or hygiene. Many women die in childbirth. Many babies die in infancy. Eleanor survives each birth, but each one is a gamble with death. Between pregnancies, Eleanor helps govern the Angevin Empire. When Henry is away fighting wars, she serves as regent. She makes decisions, issues decrees, manages the realm. She's not just a decorative consort. She's a real political power. But Henry is difficult. He's brilliant and energetic, but also cruel and unfaithful. He takes mistresses openly. His temper is legendary. He throws things when angry. He rolls on the floor in rage. Living with Henry is like living with a tornado. Eleanor endures it. For years, she endures it. She manages the realm, raises their children, maintains her dignity, while Henry philanders and rages. But there's a limit to what even a queen can tolerate. And in 1173, Eleanor reaches that limit. Her sons, grown now and ambitious, rebel against Henry. And Eleanor supports them. This is shocking. Queens don't rebel against kings. Wives don't support their sons against their husbands. But Eleanor does. She helps plan the revolt, promises the maid, encourages their ambition. The rebellion fails. Henry's forces crush the uprising, and Henry takes his revenge. He captures Eleanor and imprisons her for the next 16 years. Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen of England, lives under house arrest, moved from castle to castle, always watched, always confined. 16 years. Think about that. 16 years of your life taken away. Eleanor is kept in comfortable conditions. Yes, she has servants, good food, nice rooms, but she has no freedom. She can't travel, can't govern, can't see her children regularly. She's a prisoner in everything but name. During those 16 years, Eleanor's sons continue fighting their father. Her favorite, Richard, becomes a legendary warrior. Her youngest, John, becomes known for treachery. Her husband, Henry, grows older, more tired, more bitter. The Angevin Empire holds together, but barely. Finally, in 1189, Henry dies. Richard immediately frees his mother. Eleanor is 67 years old, an incredible age for medieval times. Most people don't live past 40, but Eleanor isn't done yet, not even close. Richard becomes King Richard I, the Lionheart, and he leaves almost immediately to go on the Third Crusade. Who does he leave in charge? His mother. Eleanor, at 67, becomes regent of England. She governs the realm while Richard fights in the Holy Land. When Richard is captured and held for ransom, Eleanor personally raises the money to free him. She travels across England, collecting taxes, selling royal properties, doing whatever it takes. She's in her 70s now, riding through winter weather, negotiating with nobles, managing a kingdom. Richard dies in 1199, killed by a crossbow bolt at a siege. Eleanor's youngest son, John, becomes king. John is complicated, weak, paranoid, treacherous, but he's Eleanor's son, and she supports him. At 77 years old, she personally leads an army to to help John secure the throne. Eleanor of Aquitaine finally dies in 1204. At the age of 82, she survived 2 husbands, seen 3 of her sons become kings, governed 2 kingdoms, been on crusade, been imprisoned, been freed, been regent. She's lived one of the most extraordinary lives in medieval history. But here's what strikes me about Eleanor's story. For all her power, all her wealth, all her political genius, she was still a pawn in many ways. Married off as a teenager for political reasons, expected to produce heirs like a broodmare, imprisoned by her husband for supporting her sons. Her life was simultaneously incredibly privileged and incredibly constrained. This is the paradox of medieval royalty. Unlimited power and terrible restriction. Fabulous wealth and constant danger. The ability to command armies and the inability to choose your own spouse. The crown was both blessing and curse. Gift and burden. Let me tell you about a typical day in the life of a medieval king. Not the exciting parts, the boring parts, because most of being royal wasn't battles and tournaments. It was meetings and paperwork and ceremonies that went on for hours. Wake up at dawn, always at dawn. The medieval world runs on sunlight because candles are expensive and firelight is dim. Kings wake when the sun rises, whether they want to or not. Servants enter the royal bedchamber quietly. They open the heavy curtains around the bed, letting in cold air and grey morning light. The king sits up, groggy and probably cold. A servant brings a chamber pot. Yes, even kings pee in pots that servants carry away. Toilets as we know them don't exist, even in the fanciest castle. You're doing your business in a pot or in a small closet with a hole that drops waste down the castle walls. Next comes washing. A servant brings a basin of water, sometimes warmed over the fire, if you're lucky. The king washes his hands and face. A full bath, that's a major production that happens maybe once a week or less. Medieval people didn't bathe frequently. They thought too much bathing was unhealthy. Now the dressing process begins. And it's elaborate. First, the linen undergarments, then the tunic, then the surcoat, then the robe, often trimmed with fur, then the belt with sword and dagger, then the crown or coronet. Each piece is loaded with meaning, with symbolism, with political statements. The crown especially. Medieval crowns were heavy, uncomfortable, and extremely valuable. They weren't worn all day, usually just for important ceremonies and public appearances. But when worn, they made a statement. I am king. I have divine right to rule. Challenge me at your peril, dressed and crowned. The king proceeds to morning mass. This is non-negotiable. Kings rule by divine right, meaning God chose them to rule. They need to demonstrate piety constantly. So every morning, mass, sometimes multiple services throughout the day, hours spent kneeling on stone floors, listening to Latin prayers. The chapel is beautiful but cold. Stone walls, stone floor, stone everywhere. The only warmth comes from the priest's voice and the glow of candles on the altar. The king's knees ache. His back hurts from kneeling, but he can't show discomfort. A king must appear strong, devout, untiring. After Mass, breakfast, finally, food. But royal meals are also performances. The king doesn't just eat, he dines in state, meaning servants perform elaborate rituals. Every dish is tasted by a food tester before the king touches it. Poisoning is a constant threat. Breakfast might include bread, cheese, cold meats, ale or wine, nothing fancy by our standards. Medieval food preservation is limited. No refrigeration means everything is salted, smoked, pickled, or fresh. Fresh is rare in winter, so lots of preserved food with strong flavors to mask spoilage. The king eats while courtiers watch. They're not eating. They're standing there, watching him eat, waiting for audience or favors. It's awkward for everyone. The king tries to eat with dignity, while dozens of eyes track every bite. The courtiers pretend not to stare while desperately hoping to catch his attention. After breakfast, the real work begins. The king holds court, hearing petitions and settling disputes. This is a central function of medieval kingship. The king is the ultimate judge, the final authority. If two nobles dispute ownership of land, the king decides. If a lord abuses his peasants, the king theoretically intervenes. In practice, it's more complicated. The king depends on his nobles for military support. He can't afford to anger too many powerful lords, so he walks a tightrope, trying to dispense justice while keeping the nobility happy. It's exhausting, stressful, and there's no right answer. Imagine the cases. Two brothers claim the same inheritance. Both have documents. Both have witnesses. Both are convinced they're right. The king must decide, knowing half the family will hate him afterward. Or a merchant accuses a lord of seizing goods without payment. The lord claims the merchant is lying. Who does the king believe? Every decision has consequences. Rule for the merchant and the lord might withdraw military support. Rule for the lord and merchants across the realm lose faith in royal justice. There's no win, just degrees of loss. The king makes his decision, issues his decree, and moves to the next case. This goes on for hours. Case after case, dispute after dispute. The king's advisors whisper counsel. The petitioners plead their cases. The courtiers watch and gossip, and the king presides, trying to project wisdom and authority while internally screaming, "Midday brings dinner," the main meal. This is even more elaborate than breakfast. Multiple courses, dozens of dishes, all presented with ceremony. The king sits at the high table on a raised platform. Everyone else sits below, arranged by rank. Your distance from the king reflects your importance. The food is surprisingly elaborate. Medieval royal cooks are artists. They create dishes shaped like castles, birds, even mythical beasts. They use spices imported from Asia at enormous cost. They serve swans, peacocks, even porpoise. The goal is to display wealth and sophistication, but actually eating is challenging. You have a trencher, a thick slice of bread that serves as a plate. You have a knife and spoon. No fork. Forks won't become common for centuries. You eat with your hands, carefully. Try not to spill on your expensive clothes while everyone watches. Between courses, entertainers perform, musicians play, jugglers juggle. Sometimes a fool tells jokes, often at the expense of courtiers. The king is expected to laugh at appropriate moments. Even mealtime is a performance. After dinner, the king might have a few hours of relative freedom. Usually, there are more meetings. The Royal Council discusses foreign policy. Ambassadors present credentials. Bishops petition for favors. Building projects need approval. Military campaigns need planning. It never ends. If the king gets lucky, he might go hunting. This is simultaneously recreation and political theatre. Hunting demonstrates the king's physical prowess and martial skills. It provides fresh meat for the kitchen, and it's one of the few times a king can be away from the castle, away from constant scrutiny. Medieval royal hunts are elaborate affairs. Dozens of attendants, packs of dogs, hawks for falconry. The king rides through his forests, chasing deer or boar. It's dangerous. Hunting accidents kill and maim regularly, but it's also thrilling. One of the few times a king feels truly alive and free. Or there might be a tournament. These are organized fights between knights, sort of proto-sports events. Knights joust, charging at each other with lances, trying to knock opponents off horses. Or they fight with swords and shields in melees. It's violent, exciting, and occasionally fatal. The king presides over tournaments, watching from a covered pavilion. His queen sits beside him, bestowing favors on victorious knights. It's all very chivalric and romantic in theory. In practice, it's dusty, loud, and dangerous. Men die in tournaments. Horses break legs and are destroyed. But it keeps knights' fighting skills sharp and provides entertainment for nobility. As evening falls, there's supper, a lighter meal, then more prayers, evening vespers in the chapel, more kneeling, more Latin, more demonstrating piety. The king's knees are probably killing him by now, but he kneels, prays, participates in the rituals that legitimize his rule. Finally, bed. The king returns to his chamber. Servants help him undress, removing layer after layer. He might spend time with his queen if she's in residence and they're getting along. Or he might spend time with a mistress. Medieval kings routinely kept mistresses. It was expected, even tacitly approved, into bed. Curtains drawn for privacy and warmth. The king's day is done. Tomorrow, it all happens again. The same routine, day after day, year after year, the same prayers, the same petitions, the same performances. Being king means being trapped in a golden cage, repeating rituals until you die. Now let's talk about queens. Their days are similar but different, shaped by different expectations. A queen's primary duty is producing heirs. Everything else is secondary. A queen who gives birth to healthy sons is valuable. A queen who doesn't is expendable. Consider Philippa of Hainault, Queen of England, wife of Edward III. Philippa married Edward in 1328. When both were teenagers, it was an arranged marriage, negotiated by diplomats, sealed with treaties. Philippa arrived in England speaking no English, knowing nothing of English customs, expected to become queen. She learned quickly. She had to. A foreign queen who doesn't adapt is a liability. Philippa learned English. She learned to navigate English politics. She learned to manage the royal household, which employed hundreds of people, and she learned to bear children. Philippa had 14 children, 14 pregnancies over 24 years. Think about that. Nearly constantly pregnant or recovering from childbirth for over 2 decades. Medieval childbirth is dangerous, painful, and offers no anesthesia. Philippa risked her life 14 times to provide heirs for England. Not all her children survived. Several died in infancy or early childhood. This was normal. Medieval infant mortality is staggering. Maybe half of children die before age 5. Even royal children with the best available care die regularly. Philippa buried several of her babies, then got pregnant again because dynasty required heirs. Between pregnancies, Philippa governed when Edward was away fighting wars. Philippa served as regent. She made decisions, issued proclamations, kept the kingdom running. She wasn't just decorative. She was a real political actor. Philippa also engaged in diplomacy. She negotiated with foreign ambassadors. She wrote letters to other queens. She built alliances through correspondence and personal connections. Medieval diplomacy often happened through queens writing to each other, woman to woman, building relationships that facilitated treaties between kings. She served as patron of the arts. Philippa supported musicians, poets, artists. Her patronage helped fund the cultural flowering of Edward's court. She commissioned beautiful objects, illuminated manuscripts, embroidered tapestries, jeweled reliquaries. These weren't vanity projects. They were statements of wealth and sophistication. Philippa also practiced charity. Queens were expected to be compassionate, to intercede for the poor and oppressed. Philippa regularly gave alms to the needy. She visited hospitals. She pardoned criminals. She embodied the ideal of merciful queenship. But Philippa's most important role was mother. She raised the future Edward, the Black Prince, one of medieval England's greatest warriors. She raised Lionel, John of Gaunt, Edmund. She raised daughters who married into European royalty, spreading English influence. Royal children were raised somewhat separately from parents. They had their own households, their own staff, but Philippa remained involved, supervising their education, arranging their marriages, guiding their development. A queen's children reflected on her, raised them well, and she's praised. Raised them poorly, and she's blamed. Philippa died in 1369, at age 55. By medieval standards, a good lifespan. She'd been queen for 41 years, longer than many kings reigned. She'd borne 14 children, governed as regent, practiced diplomacy, patronized the arts, and helped build English power. She'd done everything asked of a medieval queen. Edward was devastated by her death. Despite having mistresses throughout their marriage, he genuinely loved Philippa. He'd relied on her counsel, valued her intelligence, appreciated her companionship. When she died, he wept openly. A medieval king crying in public. That's how much she meant. Philippa's story shows what medieval queenship meant. Constant pregnancy, political responsibility, cultural patronage, charitable works, all while maintaining grace and dignity. All while knowing your worth was measured primarily by your ability to bear sons. It was a demanding, dangerous, exhausting role. And if you failed to produce heirs, your marriage might be annulled. You might be set aside, replaced by a younger, more fertile bride. Your worth as a woman, as a queen, as a person, reduced to your reproductive capacity. It was brutal and unfair, but it was the reality. Let me tell you about the darker side of royal life, the parts that don't make it into fairy tales, because medieval courts were vicious places where ambition drowned, morality and power excused almost any cruelty. Start with the children. Royal children weren't raised by their parents. They were raised by households of servants, tutors, and attendants. From birth, they were prepared for their roles. Princes learned warfare, governance, theology. Princesses learned household management, music, needlework, how to be good wives. But they rarely knew their parents. Kings were too busy ruling. Queens were too busy producing more children. Royal children grew up surrounded by luxury but starved for affection. They saw their parents at formal occasions, where everyone wore masks of dignity and proper behavior. This created strange family dynamics. Children competed desperately for parental attention and approval. Siblings became rivals. The question of succession poisoned relationships. Who would inherit? The eldest son, usually. But what if he died? What if he was unsuitable? What if a younger son was more capable? These questions bred paranoia and violence. Brothers murdered brothers. Sons rebelled against fathers. Mothers schemed for their favorites. The royal family was a nest of vipers, each one ready to strike for advantage. Take the sons of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. They had 5 sons who survived infancy. Henry, the young king. Richard, Geoffrey, John, and William, who died young. These boys were raised to be warriors and rulers. They were also raised to compete. Henry II made a fatal mistake. He crowned his eldest son, also Henry, as junior king during his own lifetime. This was supposed to secure the succession. Instead, it created a rival power center. Young Henry had a crown, but no real power. His father still ruled. This frustrated the young king enormously. In 1173, young Henry rebelled against his father. He was 18 years old, impatient, ambitious. His brothers Richard and Geoffrey joined him. Their mother Eleanor supported them. The rebellion split the Angevin Empire into war. It failed. Henry II crushed the revolt. He imprisoned Eleanor. He forgave his sons. Barely, but the damage was done. The family never fully recovered. Young Henry died in 1183, still at odds with his father, dying of dysentery while leading yet another rebellion. Geoffrey died in 1186. Trampled at a tournament, Richard and Henry II remained estranged. When Henry died in 1189, Richard became king, and John, the youngest, would eventually betray Richard and become one of England's worst kings. This family destroyed itself through ambition and poor communication. But it wasn't unusual. Royal families regularly tore themselves apart. The crown was too valuable, the power too intoxicating. Family bonds couldn't survive the pressure. Or consider the question of royal marriages. These were always political arrangements. Kings married to create alliances or claim territory. Their wives were chosen by counselors and diplomats, selected for political advantage. Sometimes royal couples grew to love each other. Edward III and Philippa seem to have been genuinely fond of each other, but often they were miserable, married to strangers, expected to produce heirs, trapped in relationships they never chose, and mistresses. Oh, the mistresses. Medieval kings routinely kept mistresses. It was expected. A king needed heirs from his queen, but he could take pleasure elsewhere. Queens were supposed to tolerate this gracefully. Complaining made you seem unreasonable. Henry II was particularly notorious. He had multiple mistresses throughout his marriage to Eleanor. The most famous was Rosamund Clifford. called Fair Rosamond. Henry reportedly kept her in a bower at Woodstock, hidden in a maze so Eleanor couldn't find her. Legend says Eleanor eventually found Rosamond anyway and forced her to choose, drink poison or be stabbed. Rosamond chose poison. This is probably fiction. The truth is, Rosamond likely became a nun and died naturally. But the legend persists because it captures the jealousy and violence simmering beneath royal marriages. Queens sometimes took lovers too. This was far more dangerous. A king's adultery was tolerated. A queen's adultery was treason. Why? Because it threatened the succession. If a queen bore a child by someone other than the king, that child might inherit the throne despite not being royal blood. The most famous case is Queen Isabella of France, wife of Edward II of England. Edward was problematic. He seemed more interested in his male favourites than his wife. He gave them enormous power and wealth. Ignoring his nobles and his queen, Isabella grew to hate Edward in 1325, and she travelled to France and took a lover, Roger Mortimer. Together, they raised an army and invaded England. They captured Edward and forced him to abdicate in favour of his teenage son, Edward III. Edward II died in captivity, probably murdered. Some accounts say he was killed by having a red-hot poker inserted into his anus, a deliberately humiliating execution referencing his supposed homosexuality. This is probably propaganda, but it shows how viciously royal reputations could be attacked. Isabella and Mortimer ruled as regents for young Edward III. They were lovers openly, scandalously. When Edward turned 18, he arrested them both. Mortimer was executed. Isabella was spared, but forced into comfortable retirement. Her days of power were over. This story shows the dangers of royal adultery. Isabella and Mortimer grabbed power through their affair, but they couldn't hold it. The moment young Edward could act independently, he destroyed them. Royal power was always precarious. One wrong move meant ruin. Let's talk about inheritance. In theory, inheritance was simple. The king's eldest son inherited. In practice, it was a nightmare. What if the king had no sons? What if the eldest son was incompetent? What if there were multiple claimants? These questions led to civil wars. The anarchy in England saw Empress Matilda fighting her cousin Stephen for the throne. Both claimed to be Henry I's rightful heir. The result was 19 years of civil war, famine, and chaos. The Wars of the Roses saw the House of Lancaster fighting the House of York for the English crown. Both houses descended from Edward III. Both claimed legitimacy. They fought for 30 years, killing nobles by the hundreds, devastating the kingdom. These succession crises show how unstable monarchy was. The entire system depended on clear succession. When that became uncertain, everything collapsed. Armies marched. Castles were besieged. Nobles chose sides and lived or died by those choices. And the common people suffered most. When kings fought over crowns, armies ravaged the countryside. Soldiers burned crops, stole livestock, assaulted villages. Famine followed war. Disease followed famine. Royal ambition was measured in peasant corpses. Royal courts were also centers of conspiracy. Everyone wanted favor from the king. Everyone competed for position, for grants of land, for prestigious marriages. This created a culture of backstabbing and intrigue. Courtiers smiled to each other's faces while plotting behind backs. They spread rumors, formed factions, destroyed rivals through whisper campaigns. One day you're in favor, the next day you're accused of treason. The court was a minefield. Take Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury. He'd been Henry II's closest friend and advisor. Henry made him Archbishop, thinking Becket would support royal interests against the church. Instead, Becket defended church privileges against Henry. Their friendship turned to bitter enmity. Henry raged about Becket. According to legend, he shouted, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 knights took him literally. They rode to Canterbury Cathedral and murdered Becket at the altar. Henry was horrified. He probably didn't actually want Becket killed, but his words had consequences. He was forced to do public penance, walking barefoot through Canterbury while monks whipped him. His reputation was permanently damaged. This story shows how dangerous royal anger could be. When a king rages, people die. Maybe not the people the king intended, but someone pays, and the king often regrets it afterward. But regret doesn't raise the dead. Royal courts also practiced brutal justice. Medieval punishment was public and horrific. Traitors were hanged, drawn, and quartered. This means hanged until nearly dead, then cut down and eviscerated while still alive, then beheaded and cut into quarters. Thieves had hands cut off. Liars had tongues removed. Murderers were hanged, all publicly, with crowds watching. This was meant to deter crime through fear. It also entertained the masses. Public executions were social events. The king presided over this system of violence. He had absolute power over life and death. A king's word could condemn someone to horrific execution. No appeal, no mercy unless the king chose to grant it. This power was intoxicating and corrupting. Some kings became tyrants. They executed people on whims. They seized property without cause. They imprisoned rivals without trial. Absolute power bred absolute corruption. The medieval world had no effective checks on royal authority except force. This is why royal courts were so frightening. You lived by the king's whim. Gain favor and you prospered. Fall from favor and you might lose everything. Lands, title, freedom. Life, every day was a gamble. Every interaction with the king potentially fatal, and you couldn't escape. Once you were part of the court, you were trapped. Leaving without permission was suspicious. Staying meant constant danger. The court was a golden prison, beautiful and deadly. Let me tell you about a typical court intrigue. Imagine you're a young noble at court. You're ambitious. You want land, title, power. But you're competing with dozens of other young nobles who want the same things. You need the king's favor. So you attend court daily. You flatter the king. You perform services. You make yourself useful. Maybe you carry messages. Maybe you fight in the king's wars. Maybe you entertain the king with wit and stories. But there's another noble, your rival. He's also competing for favor. You smile at each other publicly, privately. You hate each other. Each of you is looking for advantage, for weakness to exploit. You hear a rumor. Your rival has debts. He's borrowed money from Italian bankers and can't repay. This is useful. You quietly spread this rumor. You make sure it reaches the king's ears. The king hates financial irresponsibility. Your rival hears you're behind the rumors. He retaliates. He starts a rumor that you're having an affair with a married noblewoman. This is scandalous. If the king believes it, you're ruined. You deny everything. You demand your rival prove his accusations. He can't. Of course, it's a lie, but the damage is done. The king now views you suspiciously. Your rival has successfully undermined you. You need to counterattack. You can't attack your rival directly, that's too obvious. Instead, you ally with his enemies. You join their faction. Together, you work to exclude your rival from important meetings, to block his advancement, to poison the king's view of him. This goes on for months, years. Small victories, small defeats, alliances shift, factions reform, and all the while you're smiling, pretending friendship, hiding the constant warfare beneath courtly manners. This was daily life at medieval court. Constant competition, constant suspicion, constant maneuvering. It was exhausting. It was dangerous. It was the price of proximity to power. And the king? The king watched all of this. He encouraged it. Even courtiers competing kept them from uniting against him. As long as they fought each other, they weren't threatening the throne. It was a deliberate strategy, but it meant the king could never really trust anyone. Everyone wanted something. Every friendship might be calculated. Every piece of advice might be self-serving. The king lived in a web of lies and half-truths, never certain who was genuine. This isolation took a psychological toll. Kings became paranoid. They saw threats everywhere. They trusted fewer and fewer people. Some became tyrants. Some became depressed. Some went mad. The crown promised everything: power, wealth, glory. But it delivered loneliness, paranoia, and constant stress. Being royal meant being trapped at the center of a spiderweb of ambition and intrigue, never able to escape, never able to fully trust, until death finally freed you. Now let me show you the daily life inside a medieval castle, because this is where royalty actually lived, and castles were far stranger and more uncomfortable than you probably imagine. First, understand that medieval castles were primarily military fortifications, not comfortable homes. They were designed to withstand sieges, not provide pleasant living spaces. This meant thick stone walls, narrow windows, cold draughts, and minimal natural light. Your average castle chamber is small, maybe 15 feet by 15 feet. Stone floor covered with rushes, a kind of reed that cushions footsteps and absorbs spills. The rushes are supposed to be changed regularly. They often aren't. Beneath them accumulates dirt, dropped food, spilled wine, and other things best not contemplated. The walls are bare stone, maybe covered with tapestries if you're wealthy. The tapestries serve multiple purposes. They add color and beauty. They tell stories, but mostly they insulate against cold. Thick woven wool hanging on walls helps trap heat. Not much heat, but every bit helps. The ceiling is stone vaulted or wooden beamed. It's dark up there, shadowy, full of spiders and probably bats. At night, lying in bed, you hear things moving in the rafters, scratching, squeaking. You learn to ignore it. Furniture is minimal. The bed, of course, a chest for storing clothes and valuables, maybe a chair or two, a small table, that's it. The bed is the most important furniture, often the most valuable object in the room besides jewelry. Medieval beds for royalty are enormous, with 4 posts supporting a canopy and curtains. The curtains are essential. They provide privacy in a world with no privacy. They trap heat around the sleeper. They block drafts. You sleep cocooned in heavy fabric, dark and warm. The mattress is a cloth bag stuffed with straw, or, if you're wealthy, feathers. On top, layers of blankets and furs. You sleep in your underclothes. Pajamas don't exist yet. In winter, you might wear a cap to keep your head warm. Chamber pots are kept under the bed or in a corner. Even kings and queens use chamber pots at night. Servants empty them in the morning. There's no privacy, no dignity in this. Everyone knows everyone else's bodily functions. The window is small, just a slit in the thick stone wall. It's designed for archers during sieges. It lets in minimal light and maximum cold. There's no glass. Glass is extremely expensive. Instead, the window might have wooden shutters or oiled paper or thin animal horn to let in light while blocking wind. Heating is a major challenge. Some chambers have fireplaces built into the wall, but stone absorbs heat slowly and loses it quickly. The fire must burn constantly, consuming enormous amounts of wood. Even then, the chamber is only warm near the fire. The far corners remain frigid. Many chambers have no fireplace. Instead, braziers filled with hot coals provide heat. These are dangerous. Knock one over and the rushes catch fire. The wooden beams catch fire. The whole castle can burn. It happens regularly, but without the brazier, you freeze. Lighting is equally challenging. During the day, sunlight through that narrow window provides minimal illumination. At night, candles or oil lamps. Candles are expensive, made from beeswax or tallow. The wealthy use beeswax candles. They smell better. The poor use tallow candles, which smell like burning fat, because that's what they are. Oil lamps use animal fat or fish oil. They're smoky, smelly, and provide weak light. Multiple lamps together create a dim, flickering glow that's barely adequate for reading. Most people go to bed when the sun sets because artificial light is too expensive and too dim. So imagine an evening in a royal chamber. You're sitting near the fireplace, the only warm spot. Beyond the fire's circle, shadows dance and loom. The room is cold, maybe 40 or 50 degrees. Your breath mists in front of your face. You're wearing layers of wool and fur, but you're still chilly. Your fingers are cold as you hold a book, trying to read by candlelight. The letters swim before your eyes in the dim, flickering light. Your eyes ache from the strain. Outside, wind howls around the castle walls. Inside, drafts snake through gaps in the shutters and around the door. The candle flame wavers. Shadows leap and retreat. In the corners of the room, darkness is absolute. You hear sounds, footsteps in the corridor outside, voices, distant and muffled, wind whistling through arrow slits, things moving in the ceiling, the crackle of the fire. The castle is never truly silent. Eventually, you give up reading. Your eyes hurt too much. You climb into bed, drawing the heavy curtains closed around you. The darkness is complete, but it's warmer here. Your body heat trapped by the fabric. You pull furs and blankets tight and try to sleep. This is royal life. This is privilege. If you're a peasant, your home is worse, smaller, colder, darker, damper. But even kings live in what we'd consider primitive conditions. The medieval world is uncomfortable for everyone. Now let's talk about food. Because royal dining was elaborate and strange, Start with the fact that medieval people didn't understand nutrition. They thought food had properties, hot or cold, wet or dry. Health meant balancing these properties. This led to bizarre dietary advice. Royal meals were enormous. Multiple courses served over hours, but the food was weird by our standards. Lots of meat, because meat showed wealth. Beef, pork, mutton, venison, wild boar, birds of all kinds, chicken, duck, goose, swan, peacock, heron, even smaller birds like blackbirds baked into pies, fish on Fridays and during Lent, when meat was forbidden. But fish was defined loosely. Beaver was considered fish because it swam. So were barnacle geese, because nobody knew where they came from, and someone decided they hatched from barnacles. Vegetables were considered peasant food, somewhat beneath royal dignity. Nobility ate vegetables, but not as the focus of meals. Bread? Yes, lots of bread. Trenchers, thick slices used as plates. You ate off bread, which absorbed juices and sauces. The food was heavily spiced. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, all imported from Asia at enormous cost. Spices demonstrated wealth. They also covered the taste of meat that was slightly off. Refrigeration doesn't exist. Food spoils quickly, especially in summer. Food preservation is crucial. Meat is salted, smoked, or dried. Fruit is dried or preserved in honey. Vegetables are pickled. In winter, you're eating preserved food almost exclusively. Fresh food is a spring and summer luxury. Meals are social events. The king dines in the great hall, seated at the high table on a raised platform. Everyone else sits at lower tables, arranged by rank. Where you sit reflects your importance. Proximity to the king matters enormously. Servants bring dishes in procession. Each dish is presented to the king first. The food taster samples each dish before the king touches it. Poisoning is a real threat. Food tasters literally risk their lives for the king's safety. Eating is done with knives and spoons. Forks are rare, considered effeminate. You spear meat with your knife. Cut pieces. Eat with your fingers. This requires skill. Eating gracefully while using only knife, spoon, and fingers is an art. Between your knife work and finger eating, things get messy. Servants circulate with ewers of water and towels for washing hands between courses. You're expected to wash hands multiple times during a meal. Dirty hands mean you're uncivilized. Drinks include ale, wine, mead. Water's available but considered dangerous. Medieval people correctly understood that water could make you sick. They didn't understand why. Bacterial contamination. But they knew beer and wine were safer. So everyone drinks mildly alcoholic beverages constantly. Entertainment accompanies meals. Musicians play. Jesters perform. Sometimes there's a play or poetic recitation. Dining isn't just eating. It's a performance, a display of wealth and sophistication. After dinner comes dessert, sugared fruits, spiced cakes, marmalade subtleties, elaborate sculptures made from sugar and almond paste. Sugar is extremely expensive, imported from the Middle East. Serving sugar demonstrates spectacular wealth. The meal concludes with spiced wine and wafers. Then servants clear everything away. The hall is cleaned somewhat. The fires are banked, and people retire to their chambers. Dining has taken 3 or 4 hours. It's exhausting. Now let's discuss hygiene. Because medieval royalty was cleaner than stereotypes suggest, but still pretty dirty by our standards. Bathing was practiced, but not daily. A full bath required enormous effort. Servants had to haul water, heat it over fires, fill a wooden tub. This took hours. Royal bathhouses existed in some castles. These were special rooms with large tubs, sometimes lined with linen for comfort. The king or queen would bathe while servants attended, washing the royal body with soap made from animal fat and ashes and fragrant herbs. But full baths were weekly at best, often less frequent. Between baths, people washed hands and faces regularly using basins of water. They changed underclothes regularly. Clean linen next to skin was considered essential for health. Perfume was crucial. In a world of body odor, perfume masked smells. Royalty used expensive perfumes made from flowers, herbs, and spices. These perfumes were strong, designed to overpower other scents. Teeth were cleaned using twigs, frayed at one end, a kind of proto-toothbrush, or cloths rubbed with salt or herbs. Dental care was primitive. Tooth decay was common. Toothaches were agony with no effective treatment. Many people lost teeth young. Hair care was important, especially for women. Long hair was a sign of femininity and beauty. Women washed their hair occasionally using soap or herbal infusions. They brushed it with brushes made from animal bristles. They sometimes applied oils to make it shine. But lice were inevitable. Everyone had lice, rich and poor alike. Servants spent time picking lice from royal hair. It was a normal part of grooming, not shameful, just a fact of life. Laundry was a major undertaking. Servants washed clothes by beating them in water with soap. This was hard work. Clothes were then hung to dry. Wealthy people had multiple outfits, so they always had something clean to wear. Speaking of clothes, let's discuss royal wardrobe. Kings and queens owned dozens of outfits. Each outfit was expensive, made from fine wool, linen, or silk, embroidered, jeweled, trimmed with fur. A single robe might cost as much as a peasant earned in years. Dressing and undressing required servants. The clothes were complex, with many layers and ties. You couldn't dress yourself. Not properly. Servants tied laces, adjusted layers, arranged folds. Dressing took an hour or more. Clothes were status symbols. Laws regulated who could wear what. Only royalty could wear purple or ermine fur. Only nobility could wear certain fabrics. Your clothes announced your rank. Wearing clothes above your station was illegal. Jewelry reinforced status. Kings wore crowns, obviously, but also chains of gold, rings set with precious stones, brooches, belt buckles. Each piece was valuable and symbolic. Queens wore even more jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, rings on multiple fingers. The weight of all this clothing and jewelry was substantial. You were carrying pounds of fabric and metal. Summer was miserable. You sweltered in layers of wool and silk because status required it. Fashion trumped comfort always. Now, consider royal health. Medieval medicine was a mix of effective folk remedies and complete nonsense. Doctors believed in the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. Health meant balancing these humours. Illness meant imbalance. Treatment often involved bloodletting, cutting a vein and letting blood drain out. This was supposed to rebalance humours. In reality, it weakened patients. Many people died from bloodletting that might have survived their original illness. Other treatments included leeches to suck out bad blood, purging laxatives to empty bowels, and various herbal concoctions. Some herbs actually worked. Willow bark contains aspirin. Digitalis from foxglove treats heart conditions. But efficacy was hit or miss. Surgery was performed without anesthesia or understanding of infection. Surgeons were often barbers. Operations were agonizing. Many patients died from shock or subsequent infection. Surgery was a last resort. Childbirth was especially dangerous. No understanding of sterile technique meant infections killed many women. Difficult births killed mothers and babies alike. Even queens with the best available care died regularly in childbirth. This is why producing heirs was so important but so dangerous. Queens were expected to bear multiple children, but each pregnancy was a gamble with death. Some queens bore 10 or more children. Others died with their first. Mental health wasn't understood at all. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, all were mysterious. Madness was attributed to demons or divine punishment. Treatment might include prayer, exorcism, or physical restraint. Mental illness was terrifying because nobody understood it. Some kings went mad. Charles VI of France had episodes where he didn't recognize his family, thought he was made of glass, refused to bathe for months. His madness made governing impossible. Regents ruled in his name while he suffered. This reveals the fragility of medieval monarchy. Everything depended on the king's capacity. A strong, healthy king meant stability. A weak, sick, or mad king meant chaos. There was no system to handle incapacity. The kingdom just had to endure until the king died and hopefully his heir was more capable. Living as medieval royalty meant living with constant discomfort, danger, and uncertainty. Yes, you had wealth and power, but you were cold much of the time. Your health care was terrible. Your food, while elaborate, was weird and sometimes unsafe. Your clothes were heavy and uncomfortable. Your home was drafty and dark. And you were trapped by duty, by expectation, by the constant surveillance of 100 courtiers. You couldn't escape your role. You couldn't just take a break and be normal. From birth to death, you were performing royalty every moment. The crown might be gold and jeweled, but it was also a burden crushing the human beneath. Let's talk about what happened when royals died, because medieval death rituals were elaborate, expensive, and revealing about what people believed. When a king or queen died, their body became political property. It wasn't just a corpse. It was a symbol of dynastic continuity, a relic to be venerated, a tool for legitimizing the succession. The treatment of royal bodies was carefully choreographed. First, the body was washed and prepared. Servants cleaned the corpse, closed the eyes, arranged the limbs. For royalty, this was done with great ceremony. The body was treated with reverence, as if the dead could somehow observe and judge. Then came embalming. For important royals, the body was preserved to allow time for funeral preparations. Embalming techniques varied. Sometimes the internal organs were removed, Sometimes the body was packed with salt or aromatic herbs. The goal was slowing decomposition long enough for an elaborate funeral. The body was dressed in royal regalia, crown, robes, jewels. Even in death, status had to be displayed. The corpse looked like a king, because people needed that visual reminder: the king is dead. Long live the king. The body lay in state, displayed so people could pay respect. This served multiple purposes. It proved the king was really dead. Rumors and pretenders were common. It allowed subjects to grieve publicly, and it was a last display of royal majesty. Meanwhile, preparations for the funeral proceeded. Medieval royal funerals were massive events. They demonstrated the kingdom's wealth and power. They honored the deceased. They legitimized the successor. Everything was calculated for maximum political impact. The funeral procession was elaborate. The coffin was carried through the streets, accompanied by nobles, clergy, and mourners. People lined the route, watching the spectacle. The size and grandeur of the procession reflected the deceased's importance. Destination: usually a cathedral or abbey church. Royalty was buried in churches, near the altar, if possible. This proximity to holy space was believed to help the soul reach heaven. It also meant constant prayers for the dead as services were performed. The burial service itself was long, solemn, and expensive. Multiple priests, elaborate rituals, expensive incense, countless candles. The church was draped in black cloth. Everyone wore mourning clothes. The atmosphere was designed to be overwhelming, to make you feel the weight of death and continuity. Then the coffin was lowered into the tomb. For important royals, the tomb was often an elaborate stone structure with carved effigies. The tomb became a shrine, a place for descendants to venerate their ancestor and reinforce dynastic legitimacy. But here's where it gets interesting. Medieval people believed the dead weren't really gone. They believed in purgatory, a place where souls were purified before entering heaven. Living people could help souls through purgatory by praying for them and paying for masses. This created a whole industry of death. Rich people left money in their wills to pay for years of masses for their souls. Monasteries made significant income by praying for the dead. The more masses said for you, the faster you left purgatory. Kings and queens left enormous sums for prayers. They founded chantry chapels where priests were paid to pray for the royal soul perpetually. Some of these arrangements lasted centuries. Medieval Christianity was an economy of prayer and souls. Royal tombs became pilgrimage sites. People visited to pray, to ask the dead king's intercession with God. Some dead royals were considered saints. Edward the Confessor's tomb at Westminster became a major pilgrimage destination. Miracles were attributed to his intercession. This reveals medieval attitudes toward death. Death wasn't an ending, it was a transition. The dead remained part of the community, able to influence the living through prayer and intercession. Death was permeable, not final. But what about succession? The moment a king died, attention shifted to the heir, usually the eldest son. He needed to secure power quickly before rivals could organize. Speed mattered. A delayed succession invited chaos. The new king was crowned as soon as possible. The coronation ceremony was crucial. It transformed a person into a monarch. Before coronation, you were just a noble with a claim. After coronation, you were God's anointed, legitimate ruler. Coronation ceremonies were elaborate. They combined religious rites and political theatre. The central act was anointing. A bishop poured holy oil on the new king's head, hands and chest. This oil was believed to convey divine grace. It made the king sacred, different from ordinary people. Then the crown was placed on the king's head. The symbols of power were presented: the scepter, the orb, the sword. Each had meaning. The scepter represented authority. The orb represented the world under royal control. The sword represented the power to enforce justice. The new king swore oaths to protect the church, to provide justice, to govern wisely. These oaths were supposed to bind the king. In practice, kings often ignored inconvenient oaths, but the ceremony created the appearance of accountability. After coronation came a feast, a massive, expensive celebration. Everyone important was invited. Food flowed, wine poured, musicians played. The feast demonstrated the new reign's prosperity and power. But beneath the celebration, calculation. Nobles assessed the new king. Was he strong or weak, competent or incompetent? This assessment determined whether they'd support or challenge him. The coronation feast was also a political audition. And what of queens? A king's wife was crowned separately, in her own ceremony. The queen's coronation was similar to the king's, but slightly less elaborate. It established her status and authority, particularly her role in the succession. When a king died, leaving a child heir, the kingdom faced special danger. A child couldn't rule. Regents governed until he came of age. This created opportunity for powerful nobles to seize control. Child kings often faced rebellions and conspiracies. Consider Henry VI of England. He became king at 9 months old. Yes, months. He was literally a baby king. Regents governed for years. Henry never effectively ruled, even after reaching adulthood. He was weak, possibly mentally ill. His reign saw civil war and the loss of France. Or Richard II, who became king at 10. He had regents, but as he aged, he tried to assert power. This led to conflict with nobles, eventually rebellion. Richard was deposed and probably murdered. Child kings were vulnerable. Queens sometimes served as regents for child kings. Eleanor of Aquitaine governed England while Richard was on crusade, and after he was captured, Blanche of Castile governed France for her son Louis IX. These queen regents wielded real power, making decisions, commanding armies, managing kingdoms, but they faced challenges. Nobles often resented being governed by women. Queens had to prove themselves constantly, demonstrating competence and strength. Some succeeded. Others were pushed aside by ambitious nobles. Death also meant inheritance disputes. Who got what? The crown went to the eldest son. But what about other sons, daughters? They needed provision too. The king's will divided lands and treasures among heirs. These divisions could cause conflict. Younger sons might resent their portions. They might rebel, claiming they deserved more. Family harmony often collapsed after the patriarch's death. And what of the dead king's mistresses and illegitimate children? They had no legal claim, but some kings provided for them in wills. This could anger legitimate heirs. The deceased king's affairs literally haunted the succession. Royal deaths also meant economic disruption. The king's death cancelled debts owed to him. It created uncertainty about trade agreements and alliances. Merchants and diplomats had to renegotiate everything with the new king. Enemies sometimes saw opportunity. A new king might be weak or distracted. This was a good time to attack, to test the new regime's strength. Border wars often followed royal deaths, so a king's death unleashed cascading consequences. Immediate funeral preparations, coronation, securing power. Medium term, establishing authority, managing inheritance disputes, dealing with restive nobles. Long term, building legitimacy, creating a reign's identity. Eventually, preparing for one's own death. Medieval royalty lived with death constantly. Infant mortality, childhood diseases, hunting accidents, battle, assassination, execution. Death came for everyone eventually, but it seemed especially present for royalty. This created a fatalistic mindset. You couldn't control when you died. You could only prepare. Royals prepared through piety, through good works, through provisions for prayers after death. They tried to ensure their souls reached heaven and their reputations survived. Tombs and monuments were part of this preparation. A grand tomb meant people would remember you. They'd pray for you. Your dynasty would celebrate you. The tomb was a bid for immortality. Not physical, but memorial. Some royals achieved this immortality. We remember William the Conqueror, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Richard the Lionheart. Their names echo across centuries. They succeeded in being remembered. Others are forgotten. Dozens of medieval kings and queens whose names appear in lists but who left no mark. They lived, ruled, died, and vanished from memory. Their tombs crumble. Their achievements fade. Their historical footnotes. This must have terrified them, to live so grandly, wield such power, and then vanish, to be forgotten. Medieval royals fought against oblivion through buildings. Monuments, patronage, they tried to make themselves unforgettable. Some succeeded through infamy. King John of England, who was so terrible that his reign led to Magna Carta, and no English king has been named John since. He's remembered for being awful. Is that better than being forgotten? Debatable. The reality is most people, royal or not, are eventually forgotten. Time erodes memory. Empires fall. Records are lost. The names in history books are exceptions. Most lives, even privileged royal lives, fade into obscurity. Medieval royals knew this. They saw ancestors forgotten, tombs neglected, reputations revised. They knew fame was fleeting, yet they still tried to build something lasting. Maybe that's the most human thing about them. Despite knowing it was probably futile, they tried anyway. They built cathedrals that would stand for centuries. They patronized art that would inspire generations. They tried to matter beyond their lifetimes. And in a way, they succeeded. We're talking about them now. Centuries later, Eleanor of Aquitaine lived in the 12th century. It's now the 21st century, 900 years later. We still tell her story. That's a kind of immortality. Not the immortality she imagined. She's not in heaven being prayed for by chantry priests. She's in history books and documentaries and bedtime stories. But she's remembered. Her life mattered enough that we preserve her memory. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for. To matter enough that someone, somewhere, remembers us. To leave some mark, however small, on the world. Medieval royalty had more resources to pursue this than most. But the desire itself is universal. We all want to matter. We all want to be remembered. We all fight against the oblivion that awaits us all. Medieval royalty just fought with bigger budgets and grander monuments. But in the end, death claimed them as it claims everyone. The crown couldn't save them. The jewels couldn't buy immortality. The power couldn't prevent the grave. They were human, mortal, finite. And perhaps that's comforting. Even the mightiest kings became dust. Even the most powerful queens died and were buried. We're all equal in death. The crown is just metal. The tomb is just stone. The person is gone. Medieval death rituals tried to deny this. They tried to make death less final, less complete. They surrounded death with ceremony and prayer and elaborate monuments. They wanted death to be a transition, not an ending. Whether they succeeded is a matter of faith. We can't know if their souls reached heaven. We can't know if prayers helped them through purgatory. We can only see what they left behind, the tombs, the records, the stories. And those stories tell us about people who lived intensely, who wielded great power, who shaped history, and who feared death as much as anyone. Behind the crowns and titles, they were human, and that humanity, preserved in their stories, is their true immortality. Now let me tell you about the cultural life at medieval courts. Because royals weren't just political figures, they were also expected to be patrons of culture, supporters of art and learning. Medieval courts were centers of cultural production. Musicians, poets, artists, all gathered at court seeking royal patronage. This wasn't altruism. Culture demonstrated sophistication and wealth. A cultured court was a powerful court. Start with music. Medieval royalty loved music. Meals were accompanied by musicians playing harps, lutes, viols. Flutes. Religious services featured choirs singing elaborate polyphony. Festivals included music and dancing. Royal courts employed professional musicians called minstrels. These were skilled performers who trained for years. They knew hundreds of songs, could improvise, could read musical notation. They were the period's professional entertainers. Minstrels sang chansons de geste, epic poems about heroic deeds. They sang love songs in the tradition of courtly love. They sang religious hymns. They performed instrumental pieces. Their repertoire was vast. Queens specially patronized troubadours and minne singers, poet-musicians who composed and performed songs. Eleanor of Aquitaine's court at Poitiers became famous for its troubadour culture. These poets invented courtly love, the idealized romantic tradition. Courtly love was a literary game. Poets wrote about loving noble ladies from afar, serving them like knights serve lords. The love was usually unconsummated, full of longing and noble suffering. It was romantic fantasy, not reality. But this fantasy shaped culture. Courtly love poetry influenced literature for centuries. The idea of romantic love, of choosing partners based on emotion rather than politics, partly traces back to these medieval love songs. Queens hosted courts of love. Mock trials, where questions about love were debated. Is it better to love and lose, or never love at all? Can true love exist between spouses or only between lovers? These debates were intellectual entertainment beyond music. Royals patronized literature. They commissioned manuscripts, beautifully illustrated books, copied by hand. These manuscripts were fantastically expensive. A single illuminated manuscript might take years to produce and cost a fortune. Royal libraries contained books on theology, history, philosophy, medicine. They collected romance narratives like the Arthurian legends. They valued both practical knowledge and entertaining stories. Some royals were authors themselves. Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughters, Marie and Alix, patronized writers and may have written poetry. Alfonso X of Castile wrote extensively on astronomy, law, and history. Writing was a royal activity. Art patronage was crucial. Royals commissioned paintings, sculptures, tapestries, metalwork. These objects beautified their surroundings and demonstrated wealth and taste. Tapestries were especially valued. These enormous woven wool hangings depicted stories, battles, hunts. They took years to weave, cost fortunes, and served practical purposes. Insulation and decoration combined. The Bayeux Tapestry, depicting the Norman conquest of England, is 230 feet long. It's not actually a tapestry, but an embroidery. But the scale and ambition show what royal patronage could achieve. Metalwork included everything from armor to jewelry to dining plate. Master goldsmiths created reliquaries for holy relics. Crowns studded with jewels, elaborate salt cellars. These objects combined art and function. Architecture was the ultimate royal art. Kings and queens commissioned castles, palaces, cathedrals, monasteries. These buildings were statements of power, piety, and permanence. Gothic cathedrals like Chartres or Notre Dame de Paris were royal projects. Kings provided funding and political support. In return, the cathedrals glorified God and implicitly glorified the kings who built them. These cathedrals took decades or centuries to complete. Kings who began construction died long before completion. They built for posterity, for legacy, for the glory of their dynasty. Castles, similarly, were built over generations. Each king modified and expanded. Windsor Castle has been royal residence for almost 1,000 years, continually modified by successive monarchs. Royal patronage extended to education. Kings founded universities. Oxford and Cambridge received royal charters. The University of Paris had royal support. These institutions trained clergy, lawyers, and administrators. Why fund universities? Partly piety. Educated clergy served God. Partly practicality. Educated administrators ran the kingdom. And partly prestige. A kingdom with renowned universities was a civilized kingdom. Royals also founded hospitals, almshouses, leper colonies. These were charitable institutions serving the sick and poor. Founding them demonstrated Christian virtue and royal concern for subjects. Queen Matilda, wife of Henry, founded hospitals in London. Eleanor of Aquitaine founded convents. These institutions provided social services medieval governments didn't offer. But cultural patronage had limits. Kings and queens supported culture that reinforced their power. Subversive art wasn't welcome. Music, literature, and art that questioned royal authority was dangerous. Troubadours who wrote satirical songs about kings could be imprisoned or exiled. Artists who depicted kings unfavorably risked royal wrath. Patronage meant control. Cultural production happened within constraints. Also, patronage was expensive. Art, music, architecture, all cost money. Money came from taxation. Peasants paid taxes that funded royal cultural projects. Beautiful cathedrals were built with peasant labor and peasant money. This creates moral complexity. We admire medieval art and architecture, but we should remember the cost. Every jeweled crown represented taxes extracted from struggling farmers. Every cathedral stone was laid by underpaid laborers. Medieval royalty also engaged in intellectual pursuits. They studied theology, philosophy, history. Education was part of noble upbringing. Princes learned Latin, read classical authors, debated philosophical questions. Some royals were genuine intellectuals. Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor, wrote a book on falconry that's still respected for its observations. Alfonso X of Castile compiled encyclopedic works on multiple subjects. Royal courts hosted debates and discussions. Scholars presented ideas. Theologians argued fine points of doctrine. The court was an intellectual center, but royal intellectualism had limits. Kings weren't professional scholars. They had kingdoms to run. Their learning was broad but often shallow, and they sometimes used learning for propaganda, commissioning works that glorified their reigns. Court culture also included fashion. Royalty set fashion trends. What the king wore, nobles wanted to wear. What the queen favored became fashionable. Medieval fashion was extravagant. Long flowing gowns for women, elaborate tunics and hose for men. Trains on gowns could be yards long. Sleeves could drag on the ground. Pointed shoes called poulaines could be 2 feet long. These fashions were impractical. Deliberately so. You couldn't work in them. That was the point. Wearing impractical clothes demonstrated you didn't need to work. Fashion was class signaling. Colors mattered. Purple and bright red dyes were expensive. Wearing them showed wealth. Sumptuary laws regulated who could wear what colors. These laws were routinely violated, but theoretically maintained class distinctions. Jewelry was essential. Rings on every finger, chains of gold, brooches pinning cloaks, each piece valuable and symbolic. Jewelry was wearable wealth, easily portable, demonstrating status. Hairstyles were elaborate. Women grew hair long, braided it, wound it in coils, covered it with veils. Men's hairstyles varied, sometimes long, sometimes short, often with beards, or clean-shaven, depending on fashion. All of this required servants, dressing, hairstyling, jewelry arrangement. All needed assistance. Royal appearance was collective production, creating an image of power and refinement. Court entertainments included hunting, already discussed, and hawking, hunting birds with trained falcons and hawks. Hawking was art and sport combined. Training hawks took months. Hunting with them required skill. Different ranks of nobility used different birds. Emperors flew eagles. Kings flew gyre falcons. Lower nobility flew lesser hawks. Your hawk showed your status. Tournaments were major court events. These mock battles between knights began as training exercises, but became spectacular entertainment. Knights competed in teams or individually, fighting with blunted weapons. Jousting was most popular. 2 knights charged each other with lances, trying to unhorse their opponent. It was dangerous. Injuries were common. Deaths happened. but it was thrilling to watch. Tournaments had elaborate ceremonies. Knights processed in armor, displaying their heraldry. Ladies gave favors to champions. Heralds announced combatants. The king presided over everything. Feast followed tournament. The day ended with massive banquets celebrating winners and consoling losers. Tournaments combined sport, spectacle, and social bonding. Board games provided quieter entertainment. Chess was popular among nobility. Its military strategy appealed to warriors. Its complexity challenged intellects. Tables, a backgammon-like game, was common. It involved strategy and chance. Dice games were popular despite church condemnation of gambling. Card games appeared late in the medieval period. Playing cards reached Europe from the Islamic world in the 14th century. They quickly became popular despite being expensive. Religious observances punctuated the year. Medieval Christianity had a rich liturgical calendar. Saints' days, holy festivals, periods of fasting and feasting. All were occasions for ceremony and celebration. Christmas was a major festival, though different from modern Christmas. 12 days of feasting, gift-giving, and merrymaking. The Lord of Misrule tradition allowed temporary role reversal, with servants giving orders and nobles obeying. Easter was the most important Christian holiday, celebrating Christ's resurrection, preceded by Lent's fasting and followed by Easter feasting. Complex rituals and elaborate church services. These religious festivals structured the year. They provided rhythm, meaning, and periodic breaks from routine. They united court and kingdom in shared observances. But court culture had darker aspects. Cruelty for entertainment, bear baiting, setting dogs to attack chained bears, cockfighting, roosters fighting to death. These were popular entertainments, considered acceptable recreation. Executions were public spectacles. People gathered to watch criminals hanged or beheaded. These weren't hidden. They were entertainment and moral instruction combined. Fools or jesters at court were often people with disabilities, dwarfism, or mental illness. They were kept for amusement, their differences making them entertaining. This was cruel by modern standards. Medieval court culture was rich, sophisticated, and creative. It produced art, music, and literature we still value. It advanced learning and architecture. It created cultural traditions that influenced Europe for centuries. But it was also built on exploitation. Peasant labor and taxation funded court luxuries. Entertainment sometimes involved cruelty. Culture served power, reinforcing hierarchy and royal authority. We can appreciate medieval culture's achievements while recognizing its problems. The illuminated manuscripts are beautiful. They also represented tremendous labor by mostly anonymous monks. The cathedrals are architectural marvels. They also represent generations of workers' sweat. Medieval royalty created culture as part of their role. They were expected to be patrons, supporters, sometimes creators. This cultural production was political, demonstrating power and legitimacy through beauty and sophistication. The court was theatre, and royalty were lead actors. Every appearance was performance. Every gesture was symbolic. Every cultural event reinforced royal power. But beneath the performance were humans, kings who loved music, queens who enjoyed poetry, people who found genuine pleasure in beauty and learning. Even while using culture for political purposes, this complexity makes medieval court culture fascinating. It wasn't purely cynical manipulation, nor was it purely artistic appreciation. It was both intertwined, impossible to separate. When we look at medieval art, we see the artist's skill. We should also see the royal patron who commissioned it. The relationship between patron and artist shaped the work. Understanding that relationship enriches our appreciation. Medieval royalty's cultural legacy surrounds us. Gothic architecture influences modern buildings. Courtly love traditions inform romantic literature. Medieval music lives on in early music ensembles. The courts may be gone, the kingdoms fallen, but the culture they produced endures. In that sense, medieval royalty achieved their goal. They created something lasting, something that transcends their mortal lives. And maybe that's the best legacy anyone can leave. Not power, which fades, not wealth, which dissipates, but beauty, creativity, culture, things that enrich human experience across generations. Medieval royalty were flawed, often cruel, frequently self-serving, but they also created beauty and supported learning. That contradiction defines them. Complex humans in complex times, doing both good and terrible things. As we reflect on their lives, we see them whole, not heroes or villains, just people, wielding great power, trying to leave something behind, succeeding in some ways and failing in others. Very human, very relatable, very worthy of our continued attention and thought. Let me tell you about one final aspect of medieval royal life, the sheer strangeness of it, the weird beliefs, bizarre practices, and peculiar customs that don't fit our modern understanding. Start with royal touch. Medieval people believed kings could heal with a touch. This wasn't metaphorical. They believed the royal touch actually cured disease, specifically scrofula, a tubercular infection of the lymph nodes. English and French kings held touching ceremonies. Sick people lined up. The king touched each one, making the sign of the cross on their sores. This was supposed to cure them. Did it work? No, medically speaking. But some people felt better, probably due to placebo effect or natural disease progression. The belief persisted for centuries. Royal touch continued into the 18th century. This reveals how medieval people understood monarchy. Kings weren't just political leaders. They were sacred figures with supernatural power. The coronation's anointing made them different from ordinary humans. Royal blood was believed to be special, pure, divine. This justified monarchical succession. Only someone with royal blood could rule properly. Commoners lacked the necessary divine connection. This led to obsessive concern with bloodlines. Royalty married within itself, keeping blood pure. This caused genetic problems through inbreeding. But medieval people didn't understand genetics. They just knew royal blood was important. Another weirdness, royal prognostications before important decisions. Kings consulted astrologers, prophets, and fortune tellers. Battle dates were chosen based on astrological signs. Marriages were timed for favorable planetary alignments. This wasn't considered superstition. It was taking the cosmic order seriously. Medieval people believed heavenly bodies influenced earthly events. Ignoring astrology was foolish. Like ignoring weather forecasts, dreams were prophetic. A king's dream meant something, possibly a message from God. Royal dreams were recorded and interpreted. Decisions were based on dream interpretations. Henry I of England reportedly dreamed 3 disturbing dreams in one night. Peasants threatening him, knights surrounding him, bishops attacking him, his advisors interpreted this as warning he was overtaxing his people. He reduced taxes. Whether the dream was genuine or politically convenient, it shows how dreams operated in medieval politics. They provided cover for decisions, attributing choices to divine messages rather than human calculation. Relics were fantastically important. Medieval Christianity venerated saints' physical remains, bones, hair, clothing, anything the saint touched. These relics were believed to have miraculous power. Kings collected relics. They built elaborate reliquaries, jeweled containers for holy bones. They founded churches to house important relics. They went on pilgrimages to venerate famous relics. Louis IX of France acquired the crown of thorns, supposedly worn by Jesus at crucifixion. He built Sainte-Chapelle to house it. The crown's authentication was dubious, but that didn't matter. Belief made it powerful. Relics were political tools. Possessing important relics increased a kingdom's prestige. They attracted pilgrims, bringing economic benefits. They validated royal piety. But relic authentication was impossible. Medieval Europe was awash in fake relics. Multiple churches claimed the same saint's body. Everyone seemed to have pieces of the true cross, enough wood to build a ship. Medieval people mostly didn't question this. Faith mattered, not proof. If you believed a relic was genuine, it had power for you. Skepticism was unusual and somewhat heretical. Another strangeness, trial by ordeal, when truth was unclear. Medieval justice sometimes used ordeals to determine guilt. The logic: God would protect the innocent and reveal the guilty. Trial by fire meant walking on hot coals or carrying hot iron. If your hands healed cleanly, you were innocent. If they festered, you were guilty. This was considered reliable because God controlled the outcome. Trial by water meant being bound and thrown in water. If you floated, you were guilty. Water rejected you. If you sank, you were innocent. Guards would pull you out. Eventually, trial by combat meant armed fighting between accuser and accused. The winner was right. God gave victory to the just cause. These methods seem insane to us, but medieval people believed God actively intervened in earthly affairs. Ordeals were ways of asking God's judgment directly. The church eventually banned ordeals, recognizing they weren't reliable, but for centuries they were standard practice. Even kings used them to settle disputes. Medical practices were equally strange. Bloodletting we've discussed. But there's more. Trepanation, drilling holes in skulls to relieve pressure or release demons, was practiced. People sometimes survived, but many died from infection or the procedure itself. Uroscopy, diagnosing disease by examining urine, was standard. Doctors studied urine color, smell, taste. Yes, taste. They tasted patients' urine. The diagnosis was usually wrong, but confidence was high. The four humours theory led to bizarre treatments. Too much phlegm? Eat hot. Dry foods. Too much black bile? Eat moist foods. The logic was consistent with their understanding. It just didn't work. Some treatments accidentally worked. Moldy bread on wounds sometimes prevented infection. The mold contained natural antibiotics. Medieval doctors didn't know this, but they observed it helped. Royal medicine was the best available, which wasn't great. Kings had court physicians, educated at universities, but medieval medicine was so flawed that royal medical care was only marginally better than no care. Some kings died because of their doctors. Charles II of France probably died from excessive bloodletting when he was already weak. His doctors drained so much blood he couldn't recover. Diet recommendations were weird. Doctors advised kings on what to eat based on humoral theory. Some foods were forbidden as unhealthy when they were actually nutritious. Vegetables were suspect. Fruit was considered dangerous. Kings ate primarily meat because it was prestigious, but they believed it was also healthier. This led to constipation, gout, and other problems. A balanced diet would have been healthier, but medical theory prevented it. Hygiene advice was mixed. Bathing was sometimes recommended, sometimes forbidden. Air quality mattered. So rooms were fumigated with incense. Clean clothes were important. But overall, hygiene standards were low. Contraception was attempted despite church opposition. Methods were varied and mostly ineffective. Various herbal concoctions, barrier methods, withdrawal, none worked reliably. Kings had many children, partly because contraception was impossible. Childbirth practices were dangerous. Male doctors were usually forbidden from birth rooms. Midwives, with practical experience but no formal education, managed births. Maternal mortality was very high. Some practices were actively harmful. Binding women's bellies tightly during pregnancy, bleeding women during labor, not washing hands between patients. Medieval childbirth care often made things worse. Royal women died in childbirth regularly despite having the best care available. This was tragic and terrifying. Every pregnancy was potentially fatal. Mental illness was mysterious and frightening. Medieval understanding was minimal. Mental illness was attributed to demonic possession. Humoral imbalance or divine punishment. Treatment varied from prayer to exorcism to physical restraint. Mentally ill people were sometimes locked away. Sometimes they were cared for in monasteries. Sometimes they wandered as beggars. For kings, mental illness was catastrophic. The kingdom needed a competent ruler. A mad king meant chaos. Regents governed, but their legitimacy was questionable. The kingdom was vulnerable. Charles VI of France's madness lasted decades. Regents fought for control. The kingdom descended into civil war, all because the king couldn't function. This shows monarchy's fragility. Everything depended on one person's capacity. No system handled incapacity. The kingdom just had to endure and hope the heir was better. Weather and natural disasters were divine messages. A bad harvest meant God was angry. Unusual weather meant divine displeasure. Comets and eclipses were omens. Kings responded to disasters with religious ceremonies, days of fasting and prayer to appease God, processions carrying relics, public penance. These responses didn't help practically but fulfilled religious obligations. Medieval people believed in a moralized universe. Events had meaning. Nothing was random. God's will explained everything. This worldview shaped responses to disasters. Prophecies were taken seriously. Various prophets predicted future events. Often cryptically, kings consulted prophets before important decisions. Some prophecies were deliberately vague, open to interpretation. The prophecies of Merlin were famous. These cryptic verses supposedly predicted British history. People found meanings in them for centuries. Every event could be matched to some prophecy. This gave comfort. If events were foretold, they were part of divine plan. History wasn't random. It was scripted. Kings played roles in cosmic drama. Chivalry was a cultural ideal affecting royal behavior. Knights were supposed to be brave, honorable, courteous. They protected the weak, honored women, served God and king. This ideal was rarely achieved. Actual knights were often brutal, but the ideal shaped culture. Kings presented themselves as chivalric. They founded knighthood orders embodying chivalric values. Edward III founded the Order of the Garter, England's highest chivalric order. Members swore oaths of brotherhood and honor. The order still exists today, largely ceremonial now. These knighthood orders were exclusive clubs. Membership was prestigious. They reinforced royal power by binding nobles to king through shared identity and ceremony. Heraldry became incredibly complex. Every noble family had coat of arms, symbols identifying them. Rules governed heraldic design. Experts called heralds managed heraldic records. Heralds announced knights at tournaments, verified pedigrees, designed new coats of arms. They were walking encyclopedias of genealogy and symbolism. Royal heraldry was most elaborate. The English royal arms combined lions for England and fleurs de lis for claimed French territories. Every element meant something. These symbols mattered. They appeared on flags, shields, seals, buildings. They identified property and authority. In largely illiterate society, visual symbols were crucial. Architecture had symbolic meaning. Castle placement wasn't just defensive. Castles were statements of power. Building a castle asserted control over territory. Cathedral architecture pointed heavenward, literally directing thoughts to God. Every design element had theological meaning. Buildings preached sermons to those who could read them. Gardens were symbolic. Enclosed gardens represented paradise or virginity. Plants had meanings. Roses meant love. Lilies meant purity. Gardens were carefully designed to communicate ideas. Even food had symbolic meaning. The way food was presented made statements. A roasted peacock in full plumage showed wealth and sophistication. Serving order reflected hierarchy. Everything in medieval royal life carried meaning beyond the obvious. Nothing was purely functional. Everything communicated status, power, piety, legitimacy. This made royal life exhausting. You couldn't just live. Every choice was freighted with meaning. Every action was scrutinized for symbolic significance. Modern people struggle with medieval symbolism. We don't instinctively understand why things mattered so much to them. But for medieval people, these symbols were reality's language. Understanding medieval strangeness requires entering their worldview. They weren't stupid. They worked within different assumptions. Their logic was consistent with their beliefs. If you believe kings are divinely chosen, royal touch healing makes sense. If you believe in humoral theory, bloodletting is logical. If you accept symbolic reality, heraldic complexity is necessary. We can understand medieval people better by respecting their beliefs while recognizing them as historical. They believed things we now know are false, but within their knowledge framework, their beliefs made sense. And some medieval ideas weren't entirely wrong. Herbal medicine sometimes worked. Clean clothes did improve health. Prayer provided psychological comfort, even if God didn't literally intervene. Medieval royal life was weird, stranger than fiction sometimes. But it was humans trying to understand their world and control their lives, just like us, with different tools and different beliefs. As we close this long journey through medieval royalty, remember, these were people, deeply strange people by our standards. Yes, but humans with hopes, fears, dreams, just like us. They lived in a world utterly different from ours, a world of divine kings and holy relics, of bleeding cures and prophetic dreams, a world that believed different things about reality, morality, and human nature. Yet they faced universal human experiences, love and loss, ambition and failure, power and vulnerability, fear of death, and longing for meaning. Their answers to these challenges were shaped by their world. But the challenges themselves remain constant. Every generation faces them. Every person struggles with them. Medieval royalty struggled in golden cages, burdened by crowns, haunted by responsibilities. They had privilege beyond imagining and restrictions we'd find unbearable. They shaped history and were crushed by it. Their stories matter because they're human stories. Stories of people trying to live meaningful lives in challenging circumstances. The circumstances were unusual, but the underlying humanity is timeless. So as you drift off to sleep, think of them not as distant legends, but as people, flawed, complex, struggling, striving people, humans like us, separated by centuries, but united by shared humanity. Good night. Dreamers, may your sleep be peaceful, and may the ghosts of medieval royalty, finally freed from their burdens, rest peacefully too. Before we close, let me leave you with one final meditation on what medieval royal life truly meant. Stripped of romanticism and myth, imagine being born into royalty. You don't choose it. Nobody asks if you want this life. From your first breath, you're different, special, burdened. Your birth is announced with bells and celebrations. Thousands of people you'll never meet celebrate your existence. You're raised by servants, not parents. Parents are important. Faraway figures you see occasionally at formal events. They wear crowns and serious expressions. They're intimidating, even to you, their child. You learn quickly that you're not normal. Other children bow to you. Adults treat you with exaggerated respect. You're taught you're better than others, chosen by God. Special, but this special status is also crushing weight. You can't play freely. Every game has protocols. You can't befriend who you like. Friendships are political arrangements. You can't express emotions freely. Royal children must show dignity, composure, control. You study constantly. Languages, theology, history, warfare, governance, law. Your education is comprehensive and exhausting. You must excel because future kingdom depends on your competence. But here's the cruelty. You might never rule. If you're a younger son, your eldest brother will be king. You're spare heir. Just in case, your whole life might be preparation for a role you'll never have. If you're a daughter, your fate is worse. You're a bargaining chip. Your marriage will be arranged for political benefit. Your preferences don't matter. You'll be sent to foreign lands to marry strangers, maybe even before you reach puberty. Let's say you're the heir, the future king or queen. This should be better, right? It's not. The pressure is immense. From childhood, you know the kingdom's fate rests on your shoulders. Everyone watches you. judges you, expects perfection. You're trained in warfare, not because you want to fight, but because kings must lead armies. You learn swordsmanship, horsemanship, strategy. You might die in battle. Many kings and heirs do. This is your burden. You study governance, economics, law, diplomacy. You must understand how kingdoms function. Incompetence isn't an option. Bad rulers face rebellion, deposition, murder. The stakes are life and death. Adolescence is particularly difficult. Your body changes. You feel emotions intensely, but you can't show it. You must maintain royal dignity always. No teenage rebellion, no normal mistakes. Every misstep is political crisis. Your marriage is arranged. You might meet your spouse days before the wedding. You might be lucky and like each other. More likely, you're strangers forced into lifelong partnership. Love is hoped for but not expected. Your wedding is enormous public spectacle. Thousands watch. Every moment is choreographed. Your wedding night happens with awareness that everyone knows what you're doing. Your consummation might be verified by witnesses. Privacy is fantasy. Then you wait. Wait for your parent to die so you can rule. This creates terrible conflict. You love your parent, presumably, but you can't truly live until they die. You're in limbo, adult but powerless, trained but not trusted. When your parent finally dies, you feel grief and relief simultaneously. The guilt is awful. You're mourning while also stepping into the role you've waited for your whole life. Everyone watches how you handle this transition. Coronation comes quickly. You're transformed from person to symbol. The crown is placed on your head. Holy oil is poured on your skin. You swear oaths. In one ceremony, you stop being simply human. You become sacred, different, God-chosen. Now you rule. Everything you've trained for, but reality is harder than preparation. Nobles compete for favor. Advisors give conflicting advice. Every decision has consequences you can't fully predict. You're responsible for thousands of lives. You must be always on. Every public appearance is performance. You can never relax. Never just be yourself, even in private. Servants watch. Your children are raised by others. Your spouse might be stranger or enemy. You're isolated by crown. Wars come. You must lead armies. People die in battles you ordered. You see mangled corpses. Hear screams of wounded. You're responsible for this death. Can you sleep at night? Some kings can't. Rebellions happen. People you trusted betray you. Family members plot against you. Nobles revolt. You must respond with force. You order executions. The executioner's axe falls because you commanded it. More weight for your conscience. Your children grow. You love them. Probably, but you rarely see them. They're being raised to replace you someday. Your relationship is formal, distant. You're parent and monarch, with monarch taking priority. Your children might disappoint you. They might be incompetent, cruel, or rebellious. You can't choose different heirs easily. You're stuck with who you have. The kingdom's future might be doomed by your children's inadequacy. As you age, you feel power slipping. Your body weakens. Your mind might decline. But you can't retire. You're king until death. Aging monarch is vulnerable monarch. Nobles might plot to replace you with your heir. You watch friends die. Spouses die. Children die. Medieval mortality is brutal. You might bury most people you love. Each loss hurts. But you can't show weakness. You mourn privately and rule publicly. You prepare for your own death, commissioning tomb, establishing prayers, distributing wealth. You try to ensure your soul reaches heaven and your reputation survives. You can't control either, but you try. Finally, death comes. Illness, injury, assassination, or simply age. You die as you lived, surrounded by watchers. Your last moments are observed and recorded. Even death isn't private. Your body is embalmed, displayed, buried with ceremony. Your tomb is monument and prison. Your frozen in stone effigy, immortalized in pose you might never have held in life. The real you is gone. Only the symbol remains. Centuries pass. Your kingdom transforms, falls, is forgotten. Your tomb might be neglected or destroyed. Your name becomes historical footnote. Maybe you're remembered. Probably you're not. The crown that weighed so heavily becomes museum artifact. This is the life you never chose, could never escape, defined completely. From birth to death and beyond, you weren't individual. You were role, symbol, institution. The crown consumed the person. Was it worth it? The power, the wealth, the glory? You never got to answer that question. You never had choice. You were born royal, lived royal, died royal. That's all. Some royals might have been happy. They might have found meaning in service, purpose in duty, satisfaction in accomplishment. Power might have been fulfilling. Legacy might have been comforting. But many were miserable, crushed by expectations, isolated by power, trapped in roles they never wanted. The golden cage sparkled, but bars remained bars. Prison was still prison. However beautiful, modern people romanticize medieval royalty. We see castles, not dungeons, crowns, not burdens, power, not isolation. We imagine living like royalty would be wonderful. We're probably wrong. Medieval royalty had advantages: wealth, power, influence, comfort. They also had brutal disadvantages: no privacy, no choice, no escape, constant danger, overwhelming responsibility. Would you trade places with them? Really? You'd give up freedom to choose your spouse, privacy in your own home, ability to fail without kingdom collapsing, control over your own children's upbringing? You'd accept that every choice carries life or death stakes, that any moment might bring assassination, that your life isn't your own but belongs to the state, that you're symbol first, person second, maybe not person at all? Most people, if honest, wouldn't make that trade. Medieval royalty looks attractive from outside. Living it would be nightmare for most modern people. This is what I hope you take from this journey: empathy for those who lived in golden cages, understanding that privilege and burden are inseparable, recognition that apparent power often masks profound powerlessness. Medieval royalty shaped history. They built civilizations, waged wars, created culture. Their decisions echoed across centuries. We study them because they mattered enormously, but they were also prisoners of circumstance, people born into roles they couldn't escape, living lives they didn't choose, bearing burdens we can hardly imagine. They deserve our attention and our compassion. As you drift into sleep, Remember them as humans, not cardboard cutouts from history books, not romantic figures from fairy tales, not symbols and institutions. Humans. Humans who felt love and fear, who woke with anxiety about the day ahead, who enjoyed music and good food, who mourned lost children, who struggled with impossible expectations, who tried their best in circumstances that often destroyed them. Humans separated from us by centuries, but joined by shared humanity. People whose stories we tell because they lived lives worth remembering, even when those lives were painful, constrained, difficult. The crowns are tarnished now. The castles are ruins. The kingdoms have fallen. But the humanity remains. The stories persist. The lessons endure. May those medieval monarchs finally rest peacefully, freed from burdens they carried so long. May their stories teach us to see beyond surface to substance, beyond symbol to human being. And may we, in our own times, remember that power and privilege aren't simple blessings. They come with costs. Medieval royalty paid those costs with their lives. They deserve our recognition and respect. Good night, travelers through time. May your dreams be gentle. May your sleep be deep, and may you wake refreshed. Grateful for freedoms medieval royalty never knew. Freedom to choose, to fail, to be simply human without weight of crowns and expectations of nations. The medieval world is gone. Its people sleep in forgotten graves, but their stories live on, teaching us about human nature, about power's price, about what it means to be both profoundly privileged and deeply trapped. Sleep well. Dream of castles if you wish, but remember the humans who lived in them, who wore the crowns, who paid the price. They walked so we might understand. They suffered so we might learn. Their stories gift us wisdom, bought with centuries of constrained lives. Rest now. History's lessons will be there tomorrow. The medieval monarchs have waited centuries to be understood. They can wait one more night while you sleep peacefully in freedom they never knew. Good night, sweet dreams, and thank you for joining me in the Sleepy Law Library, where history comes alive in whispers, teaching us through stories of those who lived before. Until we meet again, rest well.